Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Rati here. So guys, today I'm back with a book review again, and this time I'm going to review a Korean fiction book, that is a Korean novel. And I'm really excited as it's my first time reading and reviewing a Korean book. I've been, of course, reviewing a lot of Japanese fiction books on my channel recently, and though I've heard that Japanese literature writing style and Korean literature writing style is kind of similar, but it's my first time reading a Korean novel, and I'm excited and looking forward to sharing the review. So, the book which I'm going to review today is called The Healing Season of Pottery. The Healing Season of Pottery, written by Korean author Yeon Somin. The book has been originally penned down in Korean, and what I read is an English translation by Claire Richards, which is available on Amazon. So this is what I am going to review today: The Healing Season of Pottery by Yeon Somin, translated by Claire Richards. So, guys, I first came across this book on Amazon. In fact, I came across this book on Amazon multiple times in the latest book releases. And for some reason, maybe because I read these kinds of books, Amazon was showing me this book again and again. And the cover, I found the cover especially, very visually appealing. And it has this fairy tale and fantasy like quality, which I really like. It's colorful, it's very vibrant, and kind of a very mysterious aura as well. This lady, this young woman entering entering a pottery studio, what looks like a pottery studio, and this slightly older woman, perched sort of on the top and, kind of standing with a flower vase in a very welcoming kind of a style. So it's a very artistic kind of a cover, but gives very positive and very sensitive, delicate, very fairy tale-ish kind of vibe. So I immediately took fancy to the cover. The cover is one of the main reasons why I decided to buy this book. Of course, I checked out a couple of reviews and I found the reviews sort of, okay. So I decided to buy the book. Now, although of course I don't want to reveal the plot of the book, but if a bit of a storyline is essential before I start talking about the book and reviewing the book. So the Healing Season of Pottery narrates the story of a young woman, a 30-year-old woman called Jungmin to be precise, who is at a crossroads in her life. Jungmin has, everything sort of going apparently on the surface well in her life: a successful job as a screenwriter, as a TV screenwriter, television screenwriter, and earning decent amount of money, living well on the surface. On the surface, everything seems to be going well. But then Jungmin faces a roadblock, a period of crisis in her life, as she's completely bogged down by work and feels mentally, psychologically, physically isolated. She faces a complete severe burnout, a scenario pretty much common with young people across, metropolitan cities in any country across the world. So young people in a corporate job kind of environments, which generally induce a burnout, can easily relate to Jungmin's plight. So one day Jungmin cannot take it anymore and she sort of quits her job on a whim. We don't exactly get to know why exactly she quits her job, but it's almost as if, on a whim and unable to handle it any longer, she quits her job. And after she quits her job, she gets even further isolated. The days on end when she doesn't even leave her flat and she's completely stuck in a state of inertia. And when it gets too much for her to handle, one day she literally drags herself out of her flat and she wants to have a coffee. She wants to have the whiff of coffee to feel alive again. And then she accidentally stumbles into a workshop, a pottery workshop called Sawyer Pottery Workshop. And this pottery studio, she walks into this pottery studio mistaking it for a coffee shop because she wants to have a coffee. And it's here that her life takes a 360-degree turn. She's welcomed by the people who run this pottery workshop. The ladies who run this pottery workshop welcome her and treat her to a cup of coffee. And, a conversation begins and, one thing flows from the other. And eventually she decides to take pottery lessons at the workshop. And the workshop becomes an intrinsic part of her life. And that's when her life starts taking a 360-degree turn. A lot of skeletons also come tumbling out of the cupboard as she meets somebody in the workshop sort of related to her past trauma, related to her some kind of traumatic experiences from her past life, and she has to confront. Literally forced to confront that person, and the skeletons come tumbling out of the cupboard. But besides that, there's a lot of positive and joyous encounters, as well as she bonds with an entire community of people. And through the art of pottery, Jungmin, the cracks in her consciousness get filled one by one, and the healing process of Jungmin's psyche begins. And it's almost like Jungmin's Bildungsroman, where in the beginning of the book she's this very kind of negative person, very negative, pessimistic kind of person who is constantly, sort of projecting herself as a victim, and constantly pitying herself, and also constantly tormenting herself, holding her responsible for things for which she's not responsible. So it gives, you get that sense of inertia and exasperation by seeing how she is. But, when she sort of like gets involved in the workshop, then all those mental knots and tangles sort of they start sorting themselves out. And as she gets connected with other people, it's the act of connecting with pottery and organically connected with a community of like-minded people, and the stories intersecting with Jungmin's own life story. She's a way more sort of spirited and positive and vivacious version of herself by the end of the story. I say a version of herself because what we also get to know is that this whole thing about Jungmin being, negative and self-inflicting and, depressive was also a figment of her own imagination. And, once she's able to sort of undo those mental blocks, she actually realizes that there's a positive and spirited person somewhere sitting inside her, and perhaps inside all of us. A lot of different things happen. She experiences friendship, and possibly even sparks of love flow into Jungmin's life. I don't want to reveal the plot of the story, so that's about it. I wanted to tell you by way of the story. Now, coming to the book itself, I think people will have mixed reactions to the book, and I'm going to tell you why briefly. Although I personally like the book, firstly, I'd like to say that the translation of the book seems very well done. It seems well done to me, at least. When I'm reading the book in English, I don't get that feeling that I'm reading something made up in English or something sort of translated for an English speaking audience, or for the thought process of an audience that understands only English. I think the translator has been able to keep, the original structure of the Korean language, or let's say the emotional architecture, of the original thoughts, the original composition, the style of writing intact. And those of you who are familiar with the art of translation would precisely know what I mean. When I read this book, I kind of get a sense of, that otherworldliness, that it's not really, it's different from the books which are typically written for an English-speaking audience or for a Western audience, for that matter. So I do, despite the fact that I do not know Korean, I cannot speak Korean, I do manage to get, that a whiff of that different thought process of the Korean culture, so to say. So personally, I think the translation is very well done. Now, coming to the mixed reaction part, even though personally I like the book, the storyline is pretty simple. It's not, it's nothing fancy or not too complicated or sophisticated for that matter. So I think for the kind of readership who is used to a more, sort of a very sophisticated or very complex storyline, plots and subplots and constant to and fro, that very ultra clever kind of storytelling. If you like reading those kinds of books, maybe this book might be slightly disappointing for you, but if you take the book on its own merit, you will like this book. Another thing is that, if you are the kind of reader, and especially going by the cover, even I was expecting that. That is one area where I was also disappointed. If you're expecting, something like magic realism, fantasy, comparing it to a series like Before the Coffee Gets Cold series or Haruki Murakami's works, then also you would be disappointed. It's a very heartfelt story, but there's no magic realism in here. It's a very realist work of fiction, but that's very heartfelt. And that's why when you take the work on its own merit, that's when it works the best for you. I think for me, what worked best in this book, and that's the major strength, I think, of this novel personally, is the dexterity with which the writer is able to lay bare the psyche, the psychological motivations of the characters, and what goes on within their subconscious mind. Most of the literature, in English, or originally written in English, which we come across, fiction books, I think it might have brilliant dialogues, or it might have sort of, really philosophical sort of subtext, and, it might have very clever storylines. But this kind of, psychological exploration of the, even through a simple storyline, this kind of psychological exploration of the, internal minds, what's going on in the minds of these characters, and not just exploration, but also connecting that with their outer actions, the dynamics of that interconnectedness, I think, is missing in a lot of work, which is originally fiction, which is originally written in English. Everything is happening, everything is very clever, or even if it's very deep or whatever, it's happening at the level of external language, at the level of external consciousness. If you know what I mean. But the subconscious of the writers is not really explained, and those connections are not there. Maybe this is something peculiar to Korean fiction. I don't know, because I haven't read any other Korean book. But this is something I really find fascinating about this book, when you're reading about Jungmin, what goes on in Jungmin's subconscious mind, perhaps even unconscious mind, and, how he connects to her outer world, how he dominates her actions, and not just her own subconscious mind, but the way what goes on in her subconscious mind, it relates to the subconscious minds of other characters, their motivations, their life stories. So there's a continuum of, the backstories, and, the past traumas, everything that's stored in the consciousness of different characters, and, how these characters intersect, these psyches intersect. It becomes a continuum, and it is within that continuum that the healing power of pottery operates. And that, to me, it's a very difficult feat to accomplish in fiction, and that's something that it manages to do. This book, it explores the internal world of these characters in a continuum, and that's precisely why it's so it's almost lyrical, the healing power, the collective healing of these characters which takes place. And then, of course, there is the beautiful metaphor of pottery. I've been almost spellbound by the way pottery is explained so beautifully in the book, and the pottery workshops, and there's a lot of detailing as well, a lot of intricate detailing, and the organic connection between the workshop participants, their life stories, and the act of creating pottery, and the act of engaging with those pottery workshops. It's just very beautiful, and almost poetically, I don't have words to describe it. It's almost poetically defined, although it's a bit slow as well, and some of you might find boring the book. Some of you might find the book a bit slow and boring, because pottery itself, but that's the whole point of the book. Pottery itself is a very slow enterprise. It needs a lot of patience, which to a lot of people, it comes across as boring. You sort of, it takes a lot of time to master. So the pace of the book is also very slow, like pottery, and in between, even I got bored a little bit, even though towards the, then like after a while, then the book started catching pace. Towards the middle, it got a bit boring. It started catching pace again. But that's not the point. The point is that, the connection, the organic connection between the art of pottery and the psychological rejuvenation of its characters, whatever you call it, the psychological, creative, emotional rejuvenation, that connection has been very, very beautifully made. And I happened to actually listen to the author's interview when, just before I started this review, I stumbled on a YouTube video in which the author was featured. And although the questions were being posed in English, but the author was replying in Korean, but the subtitles were there, so you could understand, whatever she was saying. So the whole thing comes forth, very vividly in front of your eyes when you hear the author's interview. So she basically, there's a lot of autobiographical elements in this book, according to what she narrated. And the author also used to actually work as a television scriptwriter, and she also faced a similar period of low in her life. And she also attended a pottery workshop, pottery lessons at a place called Soyo Workshop, which is the name of the place which features in this book, Soyo Pottery Studio or Workshop. And the place in this book, the Chestnut Burr Village, where the protagonist is located, is also based on author's own life. The author also apparently stayed in Chestnut Burr Village. So there's a lot of parallels, autobiographical elements out here. But that's about the similarities. The plot is fictional. So beyond the name of the Chestnut Burr Village and the fact that the author was also a television scriptwriter, and took a pottery workshop. The rest of the plot is, fictionally constructed and just takes inspiration from the author's life story. But to me, it itself is very fascinating that for somebody to, even if it's through the veil of fiction, for somebody to lay bare their life, it's a very difficult thing to do, and to make themselves so vulnerable in the public eye, it's really commendable for me. And probably that's why the conviction with which the book talks about, conviction, passion with which the book talks about poetry and the metaphor of poetry, it sort of comes forth so strongly, uh, you know so it's really amazing, like I said, the way the author uses the metaphor of poetry. Now, talking about themes in this book, there are multiple themes in this book. The first is, of course, the theme of loneliness, which is a very recurrent theme in the book. All the characters, not just the lead character Jungmin, but all the characters in this book, they're mostly young people, the characters, and they're mostly, sort of battling some kind of loneliness, trauma in their life, and then how pottery, the art of pottery, helps them heal and overcome that loneliness is a major theme of this book. But apart from loneliness, a lot of other themes, the breakdown of family structures, that's something which caught my eye. All characters, including Jungmin, have some kind of problems in their family. Maybe, it's something to do with Korean society. I have no idea. But, family breakdown of family structures is something which is a problem, preoccupation, in all over the world at the moment. Maybe less in traditional societies than non-traditional societies, but it's something which the whole world is catching up with, breakdown of family structures. And another issue, which comes, all characters grapple with, is the, breakdown of communication. So the kind of existence we live in, this is inability to really communicate our feelings. So even the characters which are supposedly extroverted, even they have problems communicating what they really feel. And in that way is the act of, when they're together in the pottery workshop, the act of working on the potter's wheel, and the, act of engaging with the pottery lessons, it also sort of helps them, intuitively communicate with one another and open up their life stories to one another. So the communication gap, and how an art form, engaging with an art form, especially an art form like pottery, which is so physically intense, it's very emotional also. So it's not, a very passive, it's a very active kind of art form where you need physical strength also, you need emotional energies, you of course need creativity. So all these coalesce, and how an art form actually helps you to sort of communicate with one another at a very deeper level. That is being communicated very well in this book. Then of course is the theme of mental health, where you talk about loneliness, trauma, everything. Young people all over the world are grappling with mental health issues. So mental health is a very significant theme in this book. So with that, I come to wrap this review. Would I recommend this book to you? Absolutely. I loved reading the book. Like I said, it might be a bit boring and slow for people, but it's a very sort of genuinely written, heartfelt book. And for me, it's very unique because I know nothing about pottery. And for me, it was really fascinating. It's the kind of book that I would actually want you to make you feel like going and taking some pottery lessons, because pottery, like I said, it's a very physical, sort of life form, organically connected to life itself, the act of, like making pottery. So it's very, for me, it's a very new thing. So I loved that about the book as well. And, plus, like I said, one of the things which I think is that, we call some people introverted, we call some people extroverted. But I think there's a very thin line between extrovert and introvert. At the end of the day, whether we are introverted or extroverted, all of us have problems communicating, the deepest of our subconscious layers, the deepest of our desires, the deepest of our fears, things like that. There are things we cannot communicate. And that's where an art form like pottery, I think, comes to bridge the gaps, to communicate that which is incommunicable. So I would recommend this book to all my readers. And especially, I don't know for you, but for me, I'm at the phase of my life where I don't want to read complicated, dark stuff which has a lot of subtext, and which is maybe very intelligent, and but it's very macabre, and it's kind of very disturbing and makes me feel unsettled. I have gone through that phase, but I've overcome that phase. I've read a lot of stuff like that, but no more. So now I'm in that phase of life where I want to read work, which is not disruptive, but it has the power of healing, which is constructive, not disruptive, and which actually helps me, sort of look at life positively and overcome a lot of my demons. So this kind of book, this is exactly the kind of book I need at this phase in my life. And I want to read, not need exactly, but I want to read. I don't know if I need it or not, but I want to read this kind of book at this phase in my life. Positive, uplifting, and inspiring. So I totally recommend. So yeah, I totally recommend the healing season of Pottery to you guys. So guys, that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. If you like the content, please do press the like button and please do subscribe to the channel. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.